Want to know how to use the famous Eisenhower Matrix, also known as Dr. Stephen Covey's 4 quadrants, and how to keep yourself out of the time-wasting, energy-draining quadrants? Hi, I'm Alan Brown, productivity coach, #1 best-selling author, and host of CrusherTV at CrusherTV.com, where my guest experts and I share ways to unleash the power of your brain so you can accomplish more in less time with less stress. And I recently had a conversation with clinical psychologist Dr. Sharon Saline, who shared some fresh perspectives on this powerful productivity tool. Just to set this up, this was part of episode 107. So you've got a big idea, now what? In which I outlined the barriers that keep us from pursuing our big idea or major project. I shared solutions to breaking down those barriers so you'll be more likely to actually start and finish that big idea that you know you want to go for. You can watch the full episode as a member of CrusherTV at CrusherTV.com, but here's my conversation with Dr. Sharon Saline, where she shares ways to keep your big idea on track using the Eisenhower Matrix. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
It's great to have you here. Now, you and I were talking about the classic productivity matrix. Some call it Eisenhower's Matrix, but it was popularized by Dr. Stephen Covey. And you have some neat insights around this classic tool, and I wanted to get you on to talk about how you help people stay in the optimal quadrant. But before we get into that, I want you to just remind us about this matrix and how it works, starting with the top 2 most key quadrants.
The first quadrant is urgent and important. These are specific things that are time sensitive and value driven. Your baby just threw up all over the kitchen and has 104. You need to take them to the hospital. Your boss is banging on your door because your report isn't due. You realize at 10 a.m. on April 15th that you have not started paying your taxes. These are all things that have a time deadline and a level of significance that matters. The next quadrant is not urgent, but important. This is the best quadrant to be in because there's no time limit, but things are still valued. They're important. Like you want to create a new website. You have an idea for a project at work and it's been approved. These are things where all of your creative juices are flowing. It's very important for people to understand that because many of us live in the urgent and important box. And the urgent and important box is the box of stress. That's where everything feels pressured. You have to do it right away or else. We'd like to live in a different box.
And we're going to get more into these because you make an interesting note about how we end up spending too much time in quadrant 1. But just to cover off the other 2 quadrants, below quadrant 1 is quadrant 3, urgent but not important. It's interruptions, mini crises that you really shouldn't be dealing with, stuff you really should be delegating.
Yes, I think that what happens is that people bring things to you because they're pressured about time and they make their urgency your urgency when it's not necessarily your urgency at all. They need to attend to it, and so they're giving it, sort of exporting that onto you.
And over to the right of that is the stuff in quadrant 4, stuff that's just wasting time. For example, we spend a lot of time checking news headlines, checking our emails, even though we just checked them 10 minutes ago, burning time on social media because we're just bored, watching too much TV, etc. Now, these are things that really are truly not important and truly not urgent, and they're doing 2 things. They're stealing your time that should be spent on really important things up in quadrant 2, but also because we're spending time on this baloney, we're procrastinating on the other stuff, and it's pushing more stuff up into the quadrant 1 where things are now, they've become urgent.
Exactly. I couldn't agree more. It's pushing stuff into that quadrant where then it becomes urgent and important because you're wasting time and energy and attention that could go into solving some of the issues and taking care of the issues in the other quadrants.
Now, one of the reasons we spend a lot of time in quadrant 4 is because we're really procrastinating. We're avoiding the hard work of quadrant 2. We sit down to work on the big project that we know is important, and because it's not urgent, we might feel like, I'll take a little break. So we spend some time in quadrant 4 wasting time on social media or whatever. It's just plain procrastination. But you also talk about how you can use quadrant 4 as an incentivizer.
Well, I think that there's actually an interesting relationship between quadrant 1 and 4, which is that if you spend all your time in quadrant 1, you're going to explode, right? People need to have time where their brains can wander. and they can wander on the internet or wander at a walk outside or cook some food or whatever it is that gives your brain a break. So the quadrant 4 is important because it relieves some of the, very intense and pressured thinking that people are doing in the other quadrants. The issue with quadrant 4 is when it's not limited. So you can't just go to quadrant 4 and hang out for 5 hours. It works much better if you're doing tasks and you take a scheduled break with timers. And then if you want to go to quadrant 4 and check your email or check your Instagram, that's fine. You've given yourself 15 minutes to play around. And then when the timer goes off, you go back to the other thing, knowing that in another hour and a half, you have another break scheduled. So you schedule your quadrant 4 breaks, and that helps your brain and your emotional state in the other quadrants, because okay, I can work really hard on this urgent and important thing that I don't like at all because something's coming my way that I enjoy.
I love the single tasking sessions for an hour, hour and a half. Then reward yourself with a little bit of quadrant 4, whatever it is. But then you got to set that timer so that when that timer goes off, you get back to it. Now, I want to talk one more time about quadrants 1 and 3, where things are urgent. You talk about the importance of assessing the value of urgency.
That is really hard to do because it's hard to sort of differentiate what's urgent and what's important. And again, for me, the thing that helps people do that is the time factor. What is the time sensitivity of these various things? When are they due? And what is the significance of them is the importance question. What's the value of them? So if I have to turn in forms today, that is the thing I have to do. Even though there's something that might seem more important, report from my boss, which is due on Friday. They're both important, but the forms are due today, so that takes priority. And sometimes figuring out what's most important and the priority is where people trip up, because they get sort of into a cycle of everything is important. Oh my God, I have to do all of these things. And you really don't. The thing that you have to do is order them in terms of when things need to be finished. That is what you have to think about. Time, time, time.
Yeah, and you also talk about how we give a false urgency to a lot of things. Oh, I need to check that YouTube video before I forget. That false urgency then gives us a license to go and lollygag in quadrant 4. Now, before we go, we got to talk about your new book.
Thank you, Alan. I'm so excited about this book. It's called What Your ADHD Child Wishes You Knew: Working Together to Empower Kids for Success in School and Life. And I wrote this book because after years and years of being a psychologist, a family therapist, working and consulting with schools, I've noticed there were many ways in which parents, adults, and kids and teens were missing each other's signals. So based on interviews with dozens of kids with ADHD and their parents, I set out to help people understand what these kids really are thinking and feeling. And these are rare insights into how kids feel about having ADHD and what they think would help them. And then I created a parenting model, but it's also good for educators or therapists to help these kids. And it's called the 5 C's of ADHD parenting. And the 5 C's are self-control, compassion, collaboration, consistency, and celebration.
And a lot of our members are coaches, therapists, and also parents, not to mention a lot of folks with ADHD among our members, and me included. So I think it will be of interest to a lot of our members. Tell us where people can find the book.
The best way to learn about me and the book is on my website, www.drsharonsaline.com. I also am on Twitter, Dr. Sharon Saline, and Facebook, LinkedIn, etc. So I hope people will check it out.
Thank you so much for being here. Great to have you here.